All right, so Susan, this is my response to your video for Systematic Theology 2, and you covered the Episcopal Church and its governance is the viewpoint that you are representing. And just for everyone who may not know, I'm approaching this from a plural eldership perspective. So I really liked the way that you approached your topic, explaining how that the Episcopal system, the main churches and denominations that currently utilize it and represent it, it's a hierarchical society with um, a bishop or a superintendent, regardless of the title. You have somebody that's in charge. You have somebody on the top that's going to be looking down and looking over this. Someone that's been given a charge, or in some cases, a group of people, like maybe two or three people, depending on the different situation. There's different church setups, and so I also like the fact that you point out that you're approaching this from a moderate Episcopal viewpoint, and I think that that's the same thing that was covered with my approach of plural eldership. That there are different ways that you can approach these, and that on each side you have extremes. And so we should try and avoid those extremes and try and find that point somewhere in the middle. One thing that I would like to point out about the Episcopal system, especially when you talked about a form of a three-house system with the top tier of the bishops being one house, and then the clergy being a house, and then the laypersons being a house. And that forms almost a system of checks and balances, and that for doctrinal change or other major issues in the church, all three of those parties have to be on board to be able to make those changes. Now, while that may sound good, I think you can see how it can quickly become a gridlock system, both within the church, and there are countless examples of many of the current democratic governments around the world that use this similar three-house system of checks and balances, and yet still run into issues of corruption or problems, and then you get into a gridlock where no one can agree on anything, so nothing really gets done at the end of the day. You're just kind of limping along. And then also, while you're approaching that, if you have the ideal of a bishop being in charge of a particular diocese or a particular region, this really gets into the approach of how you define church can affect your interpretation of this whole system. Now, while some Episcopals may define a church as a geographical or a diocese location, that it goes outside of the church, that they have control over a particular region. So that's where you can get to this particular approach. But then also, if you look at it from a perspective of the church as being a specific location of an address on a street, and then you might have another church that's across the road in some cases that are completely different and separated by denominations or many other issues. So when you see that there's different effects with how these things interact with each other, you get to the point where it may be easy to say that there is this example of 3rd and 5th century church looking at controlling these dioceses in these particular regions, but then you also get into the problem that those were heavily influenced by the pagan systems that were already set into place by the Roman Empire, and that the Christian church in these early days, or as we're going along the road a little bit more, the Christian church has come out of exile and we're starting to be recognized as a major religion, a major force, a religion of the people, that it becomes that they just simply fell into those pre-existing roles and notions. So the ideal that this is a biblical church model is somehow mistaken. I see how many people can get that notion that that's how everything's been done, and that yes, there's not a lot of church governance models from the first and second century that a lot of that documentation unfortunately has been lost. But when that documentation has been recovered, I think it leans more towards a form of pluralistic eldership model. And then also when you look at the effects of trying to recreate a 3rd or 5th century church model in the modern world, especially when you look at the cultural perspectives of this. If you have a church in one region and you try and transplant them into another region, and they have to keep those same cultural norms that may be offensive to people in another area but have no biblical implications of salvation, that you reach another crossroads there that limits the church's effectiveness, actually. So once again, and in closing, I really appreciated the perspective that you took with this, the information that you covered, really capstone to be able to bring into my mindset, help simplify the Episcopal Church approach to me. We do have some differences, but then at the same time, I'd like to point out that we come to that same drawing together on the approach of having a safe crossroads in the middle that we can travel on rather than leaning to one extreme or the other. So, Susan, thank you very much for your time. God bless, and have a great day.